It's time we come to the last segment of the day, but a crucial segment that we all are looking forward to. And like I had promised, we have a fantastic and revered speaker who is joined here with us, an international speaker who will deliberate and talk about work reimagined. But before we invite our speaker on stage, let me throw some light on what this session will really focus on. Well, our speaker who would be joining us on stage will explore the human side of work and the evolving landscape of compensation and rewards. Well, we'll also be navigating on the impact of AI, a multi-generational workforce, and a dynamic business environment that will be the key focus points in this discussion. Well, we will also have a look on the incentives, influencer behavior, and the necessity for employers to adapt their reward systems in an increasingly fast-paced and flexible work environment. That being said, through this session, we will also touch upon the importance of learning and adapting for companies to thrive in a dynamic climate. Well, we're just giving a quick makeover to the stage, and that's when I invite our speaker on stage. But till then, I hope that we're driving the conversations online as well with the hashtag CII HR Conclave 24, and do not forget to tag us at CII Leadership Center. That's the page that we all our updates and insights are coming right there. Well, the online community is really keen to know of all the action that's happening right here at the 14th edition of CII National HR Conclave. And we're all getting set to invite our speaker on stage. I can see some wide smiles in the audience already, and that really gives me a cue that you all are very curious to know of what this topic is all about. Well, I've given some insights, but it's just befitting for me to now invite our international speaker right here present with us on stage. So with the biggest round of applause to deliberate on the topic Work Reimagined, please put your hands together as I extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Scott K. Wood, CEO, World at Work. Let's put our hands together for him.
There's only two answers, so let's work with me. What do you think? Men or women? Men or women? Which is why we're together right now for the next 2 days, right? We're gonna fix that, I hope. We're gonna fix that for sure. But what do you think, men or women? Who's happier at work? He says HR. Do you think HR is the happiest group of people, of employees at work? You're right. Where is HR? Top, middle, bottom? Right in the middle. Sometimes top third, but right in the middle, at least the last couple of years. You know, there's always two groups as we look across the world of work in terms of engagement and satisfaction. There's always two functions that are the most happy. Any guesses who they are? Always, always. We do best lists. We do research around what's really working at work. Did I hear sales? Yes, smart. This is a smart table right here. This fourth table is very smart. Yes, salespeople are trending to be happy, but there's one other group of employees that is always at the top of these lists in terms of happiness, in terms of satisfaction, in terms of engagement. Which group am I talking about? The executive teams. Are you surprised? Maybe. And in terms of HR, I told you in the middle, in 2024, men were slightly more happy at work than women. Slightly more happy. Not abundantly happier, but just slightly more happy. But I think it's important as we look across this thing we call work to figure out what's really happening in between it all, right? There's a lot going on right now in this thing we call work. Let me say, because we're going to have cocktails in a little bit, I want to ask you to remember, if you remember nothing else to talk about today, I want you to remember two specific things. The first one is people are inherently driven, consciously and subconsciously, by incentives and rewards. Right? You came to this event looking for something. You wanted something out of it, right? You didn't just show up randomly. You came here. And for those of you who are driving, and you're out and about driving on the road somewhere, or your driver's driving, and you take a moment to be nice and you let somebody pull in front of you. What are you looking for when you let someone do that? You let them pull out in front of you in traffic. What are you looking for? maybe a little bit of a wave, a little bit of an acknowledgement, right? We are driven by incentives all day long, right? We can use that at work. And secondly, I want to talk about this construct. You all look like you've had a lot of work experiences. Not that I'm calling you old, I'm just saying you've had a lot of work experiences. And you've probably had a first day at work at some point. Have you all had a first day at work sometime at one point in your career? One, two. Did any of you run into that new place of work and say, hey, I'm here, I want to be mediocre? No. Right? So the question from me to you is when somebody becomes mediocre, what's happened? We don't start that way. We never start out that way. So when we find employees that are mediocre, for whatever reason, I think it's worth taking another look at it. Now, this is such a little word, work, but it has such a massive impact on all of our lives. Our emotional well-being, our financial well-being, how we look at ourselves in terms of our own self-certifications and everything else. Right? It's a small word, but it plays out very large in this thing we call life. Right? Now, we've gone through this series of work and life balance. We now know that with everything happening at work, we are seeing a lot more integration where we're working different schedules, working a bit more. Are we working more than before COVID or less? We're working slightly more. Right? We're trending in that direction yet again. Work is always going to be about an exchange. Right? There's a reciprocity to work. I'm going to do something for you. You're going to do something for me. And when that exchange adds up, we tend to be engaged and satisfied at work. So the question becomes, if men are more satisfied right now than women, what's going on with the exchange with women? Right? Or take another group. Take any group that you want to look at. Right? What about the exchange doesn't add up? So we know reciprocity has always been about work. Right? There's always going to be a give and take. Even in the crazy things happening with AI right now, we're going to see a reciprocity continue. It's always going to be built around this notion of, I'm going to do something for you, and you're going to do something for me. And collectively, we hope that experience adds up to something great. Work, as we think about it today, is only about 12,000 years old. Right? For the vast majority of human existence on the planet, work consisted of what? What was the main job for thousands and thousands and thousands of years before work got more structured like we think about it today? And that happened about 12,000 years ago. But before that, what did work look like for us as humans? We got up, we tried to get some food somehow, we hung out and did other things. So for the vast majority of history, how many hours per day have human beings worked? What was the average? 1, 2, 3 hours a day. For literally millions of years, we worked 3 hours a day. And then we began to see work get organized. Certainly the industrial revolutions kicked us into place. We brought people off of farms. We put them into factories and began looking at this thing called 8 hours a day and structuring work and shifts and looking at 5 days a week. All that really is somewhat new to the human existence. So for the vast majority of our lives, for history, right, we've worked 3 hours a day. And now we're working a bit more, right? Working a bit more as we tend to go into it. So, if you've heard of Gallup, Gallup is good friends with World at Work. I like Gallup. Their data always scares me. They're like, you've got 2 people engaged in your whole organization. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got 2 people engaged. So in their latest study, they talk about of everybody on the planet that works, 51% are looking for a job, a new job. Do you think this is accurate? From what you see? You do? Anybody else?
I think it's a lower number.
You think it's lower? Is it because of the economy shifting, or just generally you think people are happier than they think?
No, people always aspire to have something better, more unique, something which suits their happiness as well.
Yeah.
And in surveys like this, they probably don't put the right answer. They want to be politically correct as well.
So they may be finessing a little bit. So if we think, though, that there are a lot of people out there in your organizations looking for something different, I'm curious what it is you think they're looking for. What aren't they getting, right? There's a lot of people looking for something different. What's missing? What's incomplete with the exchange I talked about? What's your theory? Is it cash? What is it? Value and recognition. Work-life balance. Satisfaction? Change? What does that mean? Something new. Your job's stale, getting boring. Okay. And go back to the recognition and value. How do we think about this in terms of an employee getting recognized? Is it because I give you something, I give you a card, or I say, nice job? What's driving this recognition component that's missing, you think?
No matter what work you're doing, it might be a trivial one, it might be a very important value addition to your company. But when you're being recognized for your work, it really means that your values are being, your contribution is being recognized, it is valued, and it makes sense to what you're doing. You actually feel that you're contributing to the organization. It makes you feel happier more than the incentives that we talk about.
Okay, so there's some sense of somebody saying, hey, you're important, right? And the work you're doing is important to some degree, no matter what you're doing in the organization. Anything else missing? What might drive this? Oh, yeah, you're my happy guy. What? Tell me.
Spot it right now. I think the four C's. A, you're talking to be cool. A, B, it needs to give you cash. C, it needs to give you commitment. And third, there needs to be compassion from your colleagues and from the organization.
And why should we be compassionate? What does that value does that give you?
I think compassion is extremely I think human beings in general require compassion. I think everyone needs empathy. People need to, feel what you feel, and that's when you can go that extra mile as well. So I think that's a very important thing.
All right, so part of our job today, and also during, hopefully, cocktails, maybe a few of them, is to really keep thinking about what's driving some of these large numbers. There are a lot of people looking for something different at work. And the question becomes, can you create, or have you created, the right exchange in your organization that keeps the reciprocity flowing in the ways your business needs? Right? We know that there are differences between high-performing employees and, let's just say, mediocre performance employees. Right? There's a vast difference in productivity. So it's an important conversation to keep having. Bless you, Gesundheit, or all that. It's an important conversation to keep having because something's not quite right still around this construct of work around the world. So we've moved from this notion of working and hunting, you're hunting and gathering. By the way, for those of you in the learning and development space, back in the day when we only worked 3 hours a day because we got up, we tried to find something to eat, we chased probably some animal of some type, what was the number one skill that you would have been looking for the vast majority of work's history? There was one skill that you would be paying a lot of money for today if we were back in the days where we were hunting and gathering for most of our work life. What was that skill? Hunting skills? Responsiveness? It was your ability to run fast. Because you're either chasing something or you're being chased by something, right? It was the number one skill. And whoever had that skill at the time in the environment or in the village or in the house wherever you lived at the time, they always elevated to some type of leadership role. So we know, looking back, we've always been skill-based, right, as we look at people and working. So we came out of the farms for a while after coming out of hunting and gathering, and this manufacturing construct really hit work. And we know, as we look back about work, we kept seeing continuations of work. We had to train a lot of people at one point, going from farms into factories, then going from factories to try and make things faster. Now we're having another sense of really an evolution as it relates to technology. I'm not worried about anything happening in the AI space as it relates to people. Are there going to be massive changes to work? Yes. Are there going to be lots of people left out of jobs if they don't keep up with the skills? Yes. We should not hide around that. The question becomes whether or not your organization has the ability to adapt quickly enough to take advantage of it. But don't misunderstand anything happening in the AI space. It's going to come down to one fundamental question. Does AI improve your margins? Do they help you on some sense of productivity? If the answer is yes, you're going to use more of it. If the answer is no, you're going to use less of it. Right? It's going to come down to margins. If you follow all of the activity in the space, even on Wall Street in the US, if you follow what's happening there very closely, It's all coming down to who's going to be able to eke more margins, more productivity using AI. Again, if you're going to get a lot out of it, you're going to use a lot more of it. If you're not, you're probably not going to use as much. But what's happening today is something interesting. The next revolution of work has really already landed. You can imagine that the workplace and the workers that you had before COVID, did they come back the same workforce to your organization? They didn't, right? They didn't. Something fundamentally shifted. So the workforce you had before COVID is not the workforce that you have today. And some of us are still acting in ways that we did before COVID. My theory on that 51%, if it's indeed accurate, is a little bit more simple, I think, than many in my worldview. I do spend a lot of time in research, but my thought is that people came back after COVID and their tolerance for BS is lower. I fundamentally think that's driving that number. All right, if you've got people in your organization right now that have bad bosses, it's costing you more now than it did before COVID. Right? Our tolerance for this stuff is getting less and less. Right? Because we've seen, hey, maybe there's some other things that are more important than working 20 hours a day, the work-life balance issues. Right? The tolerance for BS is actually gone down quite a bit at work. And this is playing out in all sorts of very interesting ways, I think, across this thing we call work. So we know we're going to head into a current workstation that is really driven by very much on-demand consumption. For those of you who were very excited, maybe use Amazon Prime, remember back in the day when you had these 2-day delivery windows, you were really impressed? What happens today when you go to order something? You're like, oh, what? Can't be here by 5 o'clock? What the heck's going on? We've sped ourselves up tremendously. We're seeing a lot of ways in which speed is playing out in the workplace. So we're moving to on-demand consumption, and your employees have already moved to on-demand consumption, especially as it relates to their pay rates, their PTO balances, and this plays out all the time. Someone comes into the HR office, and what she's trying to understand is, what is my PTO balance? Because she's got her phone in her hand, and she's asking the HR manager, and she's like, hey, what's my PTO balance? Because I want to book a trip, which I can do on my phone in about 5 minutes. I can book my Airbnb. I can book my entire vacation in about 7 minutes. And the question is, what's my PTO balance? Now, the HR person's all excited because he says, oh my gosh, all you have to do is send me an email, and within 24 hours, I can tell you your updated on-demand PTO balance. And the person's like, what in the world is going on here? And we're seeing this play out over and over again. It's just not fast enough. How many of you have apps on your phones? You have apps? What's your favorite app on your phone? And if you're using Tinder, it's okay. Everybody deserves love. Everyone deserves love. What's some of your favorite apps? Instagram. Who trained you how to use that? Who trained you? The design was very different than I would bet your HRIS system. Are you still having to train your employees how to use it? Okay. Do you see the difference in what's happening here? So when I talk about on-demand, your employees are looking for data on demand, literally every aspect of their work. How am I doing feedback-wise? How much money did I make today? What benefits can I access? How much PTO can I take by when? Right? We need the on-demand because I'm telling you right now, if we've designed HRIS systems that need a week of training or a master's degree to understand them, that's not what's happening in this notion of adult learning today, right? Think about the apps as it relates to your people's experience. There isn't enough time, really, to have somebody sit down and train on how to do an HRIS and how to leverage it. We need to have on-demand. And we've seen lots of organizations around the world move their frequency of pay. We've seen many of you move to cash again. You're paying in cash. Employees work their shift. They take an ATM card given to you by the company. They stop by the bank on the way home, and they get their cash for that daily pay. Right? And keep in mind, if you've got lower paid employees, changing the frequency of pay can be a very big reward. Right? If you're paying monthly or you're paying every other week, well, if you can pay your lower wage or hourly folks daily, that's a very different ability to retain them because you're putting more cash into the system that they need versus having to wait for 2 weeks. So we know that freedom of work experience is happening. One thing I would ask you to check, what group of employees are exiting organizations at a faster rate than we've ever seen before? Any ideas who they are? Executive women. Executive women are exiting organizations around the world at really quite an alarming rate, especially as it relates to their male colleagues. So we begin to piece about when you get in there and ask, hey, why? Why are we seeing more women depart at the executive levels than men? It comes down to my other theory around BS. Right? They didn't like what was happening before COVID, and they certainly as heck don't like it now. Right? So when there's ability to move, people will move. So speed. The speed is really my favorite part of what's happening at work right now, because it is going to constantly challenge us to keep up. And I'm telling you right now, the construct of that app I just talked to you about, and the construct of you expecting your Amazon delivery at 5 o'clock versus 2 days from now, is what your employees are looking at you to change and to do for them. Whether, again, it's performance feedback, whether it's changing a situation, whether it's fixing a situation, we have gotten into a point at work where it is really driven by this notion of speed. And let me tell you, if I don't have to tell you again, let me tell you right now, we are never going to be this slow again. We will never be this slow again. So it's an opportunity for us to grab and get a hold of what we need to go forward on. This also means something fundamental changes in HR. You know, we don't think of HR as messy, right? We don't like it when it's messy. We like very clear, here's how you get promoted, here's how we get hired, here's the process, and we don't deviate, right? We don't like things that messy, especially when it comes to hiring and giving feedback and performance reviews. One of the fundamental things that's changing right now because of speed is we're moving from a hierarchy of roles to a hierarchy of skills. And you'll see this playing out when you look at all the roles you can't fill and how you have to add consultants at a much higher rate than you would normally pay, because we're trying to, there's so much need around the organization because of the speed, right, and the constant changes, that we're looking at a hierarchy of skills, and that will fundamentally change how you pay people. Right? It will fundamentally change, in essence, how you use your titles in your organization. I don't love job descriptions. I never really have. And part of it is that by the time you hire somebody, that job description is typically out of date anyway. Right? And the more focus we put on that static job description and how that plays out in the organization, the less apt it is to be accurate. Right? So how do we then take this hierarchy of skills and put it into things like compensation? It's a new opportunity for us. Right? But I can tell you right now, if you're still dealing with a very control and command organization, there's a CEO and she's sitting at the top and she's barking down orders to the organization, that's a very slow model of organizations. Right? It's actually an archaic way to do business. So keep in mind, the more hierarchy and structure that you have, and you keep reinforcing that, the slower that's going to be to respond to what's happening around you. So we know that the evolving work about why people are working and how we're working, right? We know all this is shifting, right? I think this is a great opportunity for us. I'm not worried about it. We've always risen to all these work challenges. Thousands and thousands of changes at work, right? The exchanges have changed over time. We've constantly stood up and said, we've got this, and HR in particular has played a pivotal role in doing it. So I'm not overly worried about what's happening at work. I'm just wondering, can we take enough of advantage of it in the time frame that we've got? Our job ultimately is to fix that engagement, right? It's that exchange, that reciprocity. I'm doing something for you, and you're doing something for me, and that's a beautiful relationship that happens, and I'm a highly productive person, and the organization wins, and collectively we move forward. That's the role I'm going to ask you to take on even more eloquently than you have, primarily because this notion of rewarding experiences at work is going to be a significant differentiator for you. Right? How many of you have gone back to the office full-time? A few of you. Some of you not willing to raise your hand. It's okay. I'm not judging you. It happens. If you look at the US workforces for a moment, we've got about 18% of our workforce in the US is 100% remote. Okay, so, and we think that's going to go down. We'll see it probably get around 15, 16%. But one of the first industries that asked people to come back to work after COVID full-time was banking. And I was very intrigued by the CEOs of the banks around the world and the language they used to get people to come back. Now, in the beginning, organizations gave a lot of perks. We saw free commuting money. You've got free lunches. We had dog baths. You had, all sorts of perks to get people to come back. We even had Lizzo giving a concert at Apple, right? The first day back for Apple in the US, Lizzo was giving a big concert to all the employees. So we saw lots of rewards going out to employees. Say, please come back to the office 5 days a week. But the one thing that stood out for me was the banking CEOs in particular. They kept saying this construct of, I want people back 5 days a week because I want them to work harder. Harder. And the word harder. And every time a CEO said harder, I was like, oh, it's just not sitting well with me. And part of that is, I guess my question for you is, why harder? Out of all the other things you could ask of your employees, is harder really what you want? Is that the reciprocity that you need and want? My suggestion to you to think about is, that's a carryover term from the days in which we were all in a factory somewhere producing something, where I had to be right here at this moment in time doing this exact thing for 8 hours a day, and that was my job. That's no longer what work is. Right? So these constructs of productivity and working harder, I just want to challenge us to really have the hard conversations with our CEOs, especially if you're in banking, because I'm not sure harder is going to get you anywhere. And I don't think it's going to get you any better work. There is such a speed happening at work. I'm going to encourage you also to maybe extend this notion of your onboarding programs and think about it from a construct of everboarding. Because employees are always tired of change. Even at World at Work, we have changes all the time. People are like, oh my gosh, more change, more change, more change. But a different way of thinking about that is, can you align the system, just like your app, right? Just like Instagram, to really be self-sufficient? And you're constantly populating data and information, almost like you're onboarding new people every single week or every single month. Right? It's a different way for us to think about how we set people up for success. Now, many of your rewards, promotion systems are based on constructs that I'm also going to argue kind of fit with that harder thinking, right? That harder production mentality. Tenure, your hours worked, they don't really capture productivity in today's workspace. Okay. Now, doesn't mean you can't celebrate someone's tenure. They've been there 5 years, you want to give them a party, you want to give them a cake, you want to do some recognition, that's cool. Nothing wrong with that. Lots of you give those perks around the world, that's really great. I'm, though, talking about this in terms of productivity. So let me ask you, are any of you willing to share with your colleagues here how you define productivity? How do you know when someone's not mediocre, but they're great? How are you paying, what are you paying for in productivity? Scared someone, they're leaving the room.
You're delivering the same kind of output in the same consistent manner. You're delivering the same thing in a consistent manner. And the results has been better each, it is getting better each time, every time.
So you're delivering something with consistency, and you're getting maybe better or more or some outcome faster, something in the thing. Right? Anybody else? Productivity. Because you can pay by the hour. Makes me nervous, but you can. Tell me again. Getting things done without reminders. Wouldn't that be lovely, by the way? I would love that if that would happen. That would be awesome. So some type of milestone outcome, right? Something that's progression, right? Somebody in the back, yep, you have a can just yell, it's cool, we'll hear you.
Yeah.
So do you think that will resonate with employees? They're going to talk about their value and then create the cost to do that? Let's try it. Yeah, I like to try things. It'll be kind of fun. I guess I want you to think about this construct of productivity, because I guarantee you there are managers, maybe some of your C-suite, that are looking at this construct of productivity by some sense of how much time your butt is in a seat. And I want to challenge that for all of us. The time my butt is in a seat somewhere doesn't equate to my productivity, not in the dynamic work of today. Right? It's an old construct. It's a construct from days in which you had to be at a certain spot at a certain time doing a certain role to make money. That is not what's happening in this world of work. Now, certainly some in manufacturing, yes, that's going to continue. But by and large, even there, in terms of learning, thinking about systems differently, doing stuff, putting output, my worry is that you don't really know what you're paying for. Are you paying for performance? Are you paying for a little bit of milestones? Are you paying for the time it takes for you to really order on Amazon? Are you paying for Facebook time? Right? We're paying for a lot of things that we don't often think about. And if we can focus more on this productivity notion and how you define it in a meaningful way for your employees, we might actually get a reciprocity that is really more engaging, right? Because again, the organization ultimately has to perform for all of us. Another thing to think about, we don't tend to design compensation and reward systems for outliers. Right? Most of our systems are built for a system to cycle people through, to make sure we're paying people fairly, to hire the right people. We want to hire culture ads, right? We want to add that, right? So we don't, but I guess in this world of speed and everything flying at work today, I'm going to argue probably the folks who are going to help you the most, those truly innovative, those true disruptors, are not going to stick out in your current systems, especially if you're using a very traditional, here's the job description, stay within the lines, color within the lines, and get it done. Right? There's not enough fluidity there. So, because if you look at the example, how many of you would have looked at Colonel Sanders, KFC founder, when he founded KFC at 62 years old? How many of you would have said, hey, this is going to be a superstar? Probably would not have risen to our ability to say, hey, you know what? That's going to be a superstar. Right? It doesn't look like a high performer. So I guess here, I'll ask you, as long as we're shaking up work, do we have to look at leadership, how we've looked at it? Does leadership really only mean someone who's been in your organization 5 or 10 years? And then you get to lead. Then you get to manage. Can't leader be a brand new person? She's just out of college. She's worked 4 days, and she can lead something, right? We may have to begin thinking about how it is we're looking at all of these paradigms, because if you wouldn't have looked at Colonel Sanders back then as a prime employee for you to hire, maybe it's time for us to relook at all those structures. My sense is you'll get more value out of the system, the reciprocity, if we do. I get a lot of questions about, are robots taking over? My answer has been the same for the last decade. Yes and no. Right? How many of you outsource things like vacuuming in your home to a Roomba, right? Right? Little thing runs around. By the way, did you see I love when technology works and doesn't work. Did you see there was an earthquake? I think it was California, and a Roomba got loose. It was running down the street cleaning. Did you see it? These are just fun, fun ways in which life and technology are going to run. So we've had scooters, right? We've had electric cars. There were way more electric cars being built before combustible cars back in the 1800s. There were way more electric cars being built back then. It just went away for a while, came back, right? So I'm not so worried about AI as it relates to how much it's going to disrupt work. My question is simply, can you take advantage of it, right? That's how do we help it maximize some of our margins? I think work is, in general will become less of me looking at you going, how much time is your butt in the seat, and more trying to figure out, when do I use AI and when do I use a human? Right? We're all going to probably work for some type of robot in our time as work. We know that's coming. We're certainly going to utilize it. But that's going to be the new question on leadership. When do I use someone that's kind of AI or robotic, and when do I use a real person? Have you followed the negotiations around contracts lately in the unions, all the strike? We've had a lot of strike activity around the world in the last year. Any conclusions on the contracts that you're seeing come out of those? Because there's one thing in there I want you to think about. So in the contracts that we're seeing come out, so the union go on strike, the union strikes, we have a contract written. It's talking about the percentage of time the company has to use a live human being versus a robot or AI. Right? This is unprecedented in terms of contracts. So don't be surprised if you've got a workforce that comes back and says, hey, are you going to guarantee me a certain amount of time that I can be a real human versus utilizing some sense of AI? We've never seen it written into contracts before at the union level, so it's a real interesting change that's happening at work. When you think about AI, my coaching for you now is to make sure you're looking at this thing as a fairly large bucket. Right? It's a large bucket of things in terms of this thing we call AI. And there are certain ways to dive into it. You don't need to look at everything at once. I would pick something you want to try that's kind of safe and easy and begin playing with it at the systems level in your organization. We've seen some companies go too far too quickly, and it's not served them well, because AI, in terms of its integration into work, is still fairly new. Right? AI has been around for, yes, 75 years, but its integration into work and what it really means, we don't quite know yet. For those of you who have either grandkids or kids, and they have friends, are their friends always running around together now, or do they have friends only on the screen? They're digital friends. Right? And when you ask younger folks today, is that relationship real? The answer is yes. It's my best friend. Have you ever met? Never met. No, but I see her all the time on the screen. Right? It's a different construct of how we're valuing relationships. And a lot of your HR systems are probably built on the notion of real people being there. This is not always going to be the case. For example, if I do really well and I'm a superstar performer, but I've used a lot of AI, do you give me less of a bonus? Do you give me more of a bonus? If you're 100% doing it in a human being and I'm 100% doing it robotically, what are the differences in performance reviews? What's the difference in compensation? Right? This is all going to hit us, and if it's not hit you already, it's definitely coming. I always like people's reactions to things. It's just funny. I always like people send me all sorts of fun pictures. It makes me laugh. These photos. Maybe AI can fix it. Who knows, right? We have a lot of hope. We'll see. If you can't read this, it says, fun fact, wind chimes are made from the metallic bones of robots that tried to overthrow us. Hang them outside of your house as a warning to others. There is a lot of trepidation about what AI will do to workers. I am not as worried about it because we've always risen to these challenges. However, if you have not started in your HR space playing with the construct of what AI will mean to your organization, not even to your HR team, but to your organization, it's time. Right? It's time to dive in and start playing because you're a bit behind if you've not dove in yet. Right? We know it's going to have a big impact on many of the jobs, especially in the analyst roles for compensation, for example. Some of the work just won't be needed to the extent that we need it today. So here's some of the contracts. Keep in mind, the difference between a human workforce and a robotic workforce is that robots can't strike. Now, I'm following this very closely, and the reason is this. If I'm a CEO somewhere and I'm looking at margins, I'm like, wait a minute, do you mean I could have a workforce that really has to show up when I want, they don't get sick, right? They're constantly going to work, and they can't strike? And I've got a workforce that has issues, and they're humans, and it may be very tempting to say, let's automate more and more and more. Okay, automation is going to be okay as long as we're then using the roles and really bringing up the human experience differently at work. Because this seems like a very nice thing to choose. I'm always cautioning CEOs, don't go so far to this thinking that this is the magical answer. Right? It's not. Right now, AI is more expensive than a human being. Right? We've got a cost advantage right now on humans. Humans are cheaper right now. Now, will that always be the case? No. I mean, collectively speaking, they're cheaper. Right? Not in every instance, of course. But they will not always be cheaper than humans. Right? So right now, as AI gets stronger, we think AI right now is really about at the high school level, high school graduate level across the entire world. But it'll go on to college. It'll go on to have kids and grow up and get better and faster. There's a term called singularity that people are worried about. Singularity is basically going to mean when AI is collectively more smart than the entire human population. It's not collectively as smart as all of us together right now. It's as smart as some individuals, but it's really operating at about a high school level across the world. So keep in mind, we are going to see some tension coming out between employees and how much human stuff happens and how much AI stuff will happen. And the key, again, it's going to be to begin teaching your managers at the time to use a robot, AI, and a time to use a human. We will have to be that kind of juxtaposed in our thinking as we go forward. And I want you to get ahead of it by thinking, what does it mean to your hiring processes, to your reward systems, to your performance systems, to your feedback systems? You're going to have to give feedback that integrates AI into it. And does it mean that you pay more for AI assistance? Do you pay less? There's lots of litigation right now at work. What happens when a driverless truck hits somebody? Right, there's fun videos around the police officer has pulled over a car in LA, and it's a driverless car. And the police officer is running around the car going, there's nobody in it. There's nobody in it. Because all of our systems around a police person giving a ticket to someone means there should be a driver in that car to give a ticket to. There's a version of that happening in our HR space as well. Right? We have built systems that really accounted for a human being there all the time. Some of you work remote all the time now. Some of you are not going to be showing up, right? So it's a cool opportunity, I think, for us to really think about this notion of work. Now, I have a theory that we're still always going to be human. Right? We're still going to need the stuff that you all talked about in terms of the recognition, the value, the work life. We're still going to need that stuff. I teach at Georgetown University, and one of the work changes they've made is they've taken their security guards that used to be human, and they've replaced them with these roving bots. And they're very nice bots. In fact, this bot is called Steve. Steve runs around and basically takes pictures of everything happening on campus, and there's somebody sitting in a room somewhere watching all of Steve's pictures that come up. And if you ever go to Georgetown and you want to meet Steve, he actually will stop and take a selfie with you. He's been trained and programmed to take a selfie. He's very friendly. However, I got to campus one day and something was kind of up. Steve had fallen in the fountain. And I just watched the whole campus react. They're like, what's happened to Steve? And the news cameras came. It was like, is it a conspiracy? Was Steve drunk? Right? That was one headline. Was it a competing school? Somebody pushed Steve. They were doing something and didn't want to be caught on camera, so they pushed Steve. It was a lot of human reaction to really a bunch of metallic robots, right? It was just a robot running around. But it was a fascinating reaction to it. Now, just in case you're also bought in now and worried about Steve, Steve is fine now. If you can tell in this one picture on the right, it was raining, and he got just a little too close to the curb and just toppled in. They fished him out, and they've made him back, and Steve is roaming around now, and he's fine. But we're going to see these moments where I'm going to call them these being human, right? We're going to have these very human moments at work still, no matter what. But don't underestimate that we're going to also get attached to things. Like, don't you get nervous when you don't have this? Right? You're like, oh my God, my phone, right? It's a part of you. Right? So this will integrate into work very similarly. And the more we can get ahead of it, the better. Again, Steve is fine now. If you want to do a selfie with him, if you go to Georgetown, which is in Washington, D.C., by all means, do so. If you've not checked in with your teenage kids around how they're using AI, I was really quite shocked when talking with some teenagers about their utilization of AI. Some of us may have had an imaginary friend when we were little. It's kind of what's happening now. Because this was entered in a 15-year-old named Charlotte. She was teaching me on some of the stuff a while ago. And she entered in this notion of, hey, I've had a hard day, to a chat box. And came back with, of course, I'm here to listen. Tell me about it. And we begin to see this interesting reliance on AI to help us do very human things like, hey, I've had a bad day. Can you talk to me about it? Or type in, you have a bad boss and what to do about it. You'll be surprised, I think, what comes back. But the cool news is I think there's great ways we can use this. Now look, the world of work is behind in terms of skills. We do not have, as a population around the world, the skills that we need right now to do all the jobs that are coming. We just don't. We're behind. We've not kept up, and we've not been able to keep up. So things like using chatbots to really take on, in this case, an Egyptian form of a teacher can help you learn the languages. Did anybody follow what happened with Catholic Charities in the US with Father Justin? So Father Justin in the middle there was a chatbot, but you know that AI continually improves itself, right? Sometimes more quickly than humans do. So Father Justin kept getting better and better, and he started giving out communion, right? Which people were like, whoa, I didn't know a bot could give out communion. It's not necessarily done if you talk to those folks who are Catholic. But the real interesting point was when Father Justin, the bot, authorized you to be baptized in Gatorade, right? So you go back, and the previous panel talked about biases in terms of technology and AI. It's how you design, right? How you design all this technology to work. There's an outcome on the other side. But when Father Justin said, yes, you can get baptized in Gatorade, people were like, wait a minute, we think we might have a small problem here. So just know that we're still early days as it relates to AI integration. We'll have to try some things. We're going to have to try how does this thing around work can it be done with I'm now giving feedback to a robot and a human being at the same time for the same output. Right? This is going to be a very exciting time, I think. Lots of ways I think we can upskill with AI. If I were you, I would be getting your skills development program linked somehow that you can onboard the skills much faster. We're behind as a world, so anything every organization can do to increase the skills, I think it'll be a really helpful thing. As I get up here and wrap up here, the exchange I talked about, the reciprocity, and I know we're getting close to cocktail time, so maybe we can end here in a minute. This reciprocity, don't underestimate the value that trust is going to still have in your workplace, right? And that comes along trust and credibility of leadership. And I'm looking at things, for example, if you had an office and you had something on the wall that said your corporate values, your company values, and when those values really aren't playing out in your workplace. So if you say trust, but you are searching me coming in and out of your workplace, but trust is your number one value, I might wonder if trust is really your value, right? And we're seeing this play out. If you saw this story play out, a gentleman in London was giving a speech. His speech was entitled, really, why investors don't need to worry about climate risk when they're investing. The problem was, he was the head of HSBC's Sustainable and Responsible Investment Practices, right? So I share this example to say, when leaders now are saying, hey, you can trust me. Hey, we pay fairly here. Hey, we're a great place to work. The accountability, right, because the BS is lowered, right, is way more astute than it's ever been before. So if those words on the walls of your organization, or the digital walls that you have, talk about trust and integrity and belonging and all those things, the more it matches, the better off you're going to be, because otherwise it's robbing you from that reciprocity that I've been talking about that's so really needed at work. And I'm going to end here. I saw this sign in a fast food restaurant, and it really, to me, reflected right on the fact that this issue lies with management. And it says, we can fight at this location, so think before you speak. And I read it like 10 times. I'm like, does this really say what my brain is telling me it says? But it gets to that notion of less BS at work. And it gets to this notion that people want to feel included. They want to feel like they're important at work, even in issues where, in this case, it's a fast food restaurant called Popeyes. Right? But to go to this extent, I was like, wow, failure of management. But secondly, I was impressed that they put the sign up. I thought it was great. So I took lots of pictures, and I talk about it quite a bit. This notion of being treated with respect and included isn't going anywhere in the terms of AI and speed. It's not. And we've got one other challenge that I'll end with here. Does anybody know what this is? It's something you can buy and have shipped right to your house that toggles your computer so it makes it look like you're online as many hours a day as you want. It's $19.99, right, USD. So a few rupees there to buy it. But somebody had to manufacture this, make it, and they're selling quite well. It's kind of the old notion of when we worked in an office and you left your light on because the boss was still working down the hallway and you were waiting for them to leave, you know. That thinking still exists in a lot of our workplaces. primarily because we look at how much time someone spends in a seat somewhere as productivity. I'll say to you again, it doesn't necessarily measure productivity anymore. And these things concern me because it's just reinforcing a very old thing about work that doesn't really exist anymore. Right? So I would say, don't buy them, let's get rid of them. And let's see here. I guess this is my last question, which we can talk about over cocktails. I just want to make sure that when you think about the exchange, what you're giving your people and what you need them to give you is on par. No matter what's happening in this world, how fast we are. What's the average attention span for an adult in the world right now? Average attention span for an adult. You've got 8 seconds. Okay, so you got about 8 seconds. And when you're on your phone and you're trying to load some site to buy something, how long do you give it before you get annoyed and move on? You give it 3 seconds. You've got 3 seconds. So when your employees are asking and coming to you and trying to find information, right, you've got a maximum of 8 seconds, but it's more like 3 seconds they're trying to find something before they just move on to someplace else. That's part of the reciprocity. It's part of what we can do to give. I'm optimistic about where this thing called work is going. I think being in the HR space is the perfect place to be right now. Keep in mind, your compensation and benefit costs of your people costs are usually around 70% of your organization's revenue. That doesn't make you needing a seat at the table. That makes you the table. Never forget the power that comes along with that. You control 70% of the spend of revenue against your entire annual revenue with your people. Use that to make really good changes and rough people up if you need to on occasion at the leadership level about making this reciprocity really work. So I think it's probably cocktail time. I've rambled enough. Thank you all for having me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, just 1 second. Sorry. As we end this session,
So that side, sir.
sorry, my
You're back
apologies.
again.
As we end this session, right, something for the entire HR fraternity to ponder upon. I just read the news in the break right now. There's an Indian startup called Yes Madam, which is a salon service startup. They created a mental awareness survey, and let this sink in, okay? They created a mental health awareness survey, and the employees who are extremely stressed out have all been laid off. It's an India Today article. Yeah, Yes Madam, salon startup service featured in Shark Tank India, conducted a mental health awareness survey. Employees who are extremely stressed out have been laid off. So, yeah.
Well, do we have any more perspectives, any thoughts that you'd like to share? Well, all right. With that, can we have a louder round of applause for Dr. Scott K. Wood? Thank you so very much, sir, for sharing those valuable thoughts with us. And of course, sharing a very different perspective and taking us through the importance of learning and adaptability to really thrive in a very dynamic landscape that we live in. With that, may I please invite you, sir, on stage for a minute, as it's time we felicitate you with a memento. Sir, may I please invite you on stage? May I please invite Ms. Jane Karakar to please join us and felicitate Dr. Scott with a memento, a token of appreciation. Thank you for sharing your valuable thoughts with us. And truly, it's been, like I mentioned, we did save the best for the last. A round of applause one more time for Dr. Scott K. Wood, CEO, World at Work.